The slave girl they thought they controlled became their worst nightmare. She was born into a world that never asked her name, in the low, damp quarters behind a vast Virginia plantation where the air smelled of wet earth, smoke, and unspoken suffering. A child entered life already owned by someone else. Her mother's cry was swallowed by the night, quickly silenced, not out of cruelty alone, but habit. On this land, birth was not celebrated. It was calculated. Another body meant another future pair of hands, another number added to the plantation's living inventory. Before the girl ever opened her eyes, her fate had already been decided by ledgers, chains of authority, and men who believed ownership erased humanity. The plantation itself rose like a kingdom built on stolen breath. White columns stood tall against the Virginia sky, polished and proud, while behind them stretched fields that seemed endless. Tobacco leaves waved gently in the breeze, hiding the truth beneath their calm beauty. To outsiders, the estate looked prosperous, orderly, even peaceful. But peace never lived here. It only passed through, quickly chased away by the crack of commands, the rhythm of forced labor, and the silence of people trained from childhood not to scream too loudly. As the girl grew, she learned the rules long before she learned how to read faces or trust voices. The rules were not written, yet everyone knew them. Do not look directly into a white person's eyes. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not ask why. Do not cry where you can be seen. Pain was not something to escape. It was something to endure quietly. Even as a child, she understood that noise attracted punishment and attention invited danger. Silence, she learned, was a form of armor. Her earliest memories were not of games or lullabies, but of work. Tiny hands pulling weeds from hard soil, bare feet bleeding on stones warmed by the sun, hunger that settled deep into her bones and never fully left. At night, she slept curled against her mother, listening to whispered prayers that never mentioned freedom, only survival. Freedom was too fragile a word to speak aloud. It could get you killed. The women around her taught her more than the men ever did. They taught her how to disappear in plain sight, how to make her face blank when fear surged through her chest, how to hide emotions behind a lowered gaze. They warned her of what awaited girls as they grew older, though never directly. Their warnings came in looks held too long, in sudden silences when men approached, in hands gripping her arm just a little tighter when she wandered too close to the big house. The big house loomed over the plantation like a watchful god. Its windows reflected the sky, but inside, shadows ruled. That was where power lived. That was where decisions were made that could end or ruin lives without consequence. As a child, she feared it the way one fears fire, beautiful from a distance, deadly up close. She was told she would one day be called there to work, cleaning, serving, standing silently while others spoke. The thought filled her with dread she did not yet have words for. Virginia's seasons passed with cruel predictability. Summers burned her skin and stole her strength. Winters cut through her thin clothes, turning fingers numb and nights unbearable. Yet the work never stopped. The plantation demanded constant obedience, constant productivity. Overseers watched with cold eyes, enforcing discipline not because they enjoyed it, but because the system demanded it. Cruelty had become routine, almost administrative. By the time the girl reached an age when childhood should have lingered, it vanished instead. Her body changed, and with it, the way people looked at her. Conversations stopped when she entered a room. Overseers lingered too long. The air around her felt heavier, more dangerous. Her mother noticed too. Fear lined her face now, deeper than before. She tried to keep her daughter close, but on plantations like this, closeness was a privilege no enslaved family truly possessed. The plantation master was a man spoken of in fragments, never praised, never openly condemned, just feared. His presence altered the rhythm of the land. When his horse approached, voices dropped, spines straightened, even overseers stiffened. Power radiated from him not because he shouted, but because he did not have to. His authority was absolute, protected by law, wealth, and a society built to excuse him. The girl first saw him clearly one afternoon as she carried water across the yard. He stood near the porch, dressed immaculately, his posture relaxed, his eyes scanning the property like a man inspecting furniture. When his gaze landed on her, it lingered, not with curiosity but with assessment. She felt it like a hand closing around her throat. In that moment she understood something fundamental. To him, she was not a child, not a person, but a possession, one he could claim at will. From that day forward, fear followed her like a shadow. Tasks that once felt routine now felt like traps. Being summoned to the big house filled her stomach with knots. She watched older girls return changed, quieter, hollow-eyed, carrying a weight no one explained, but everyone recognized. Some disappeared entirely, sold away without warning. Others stayed, but something in them broke beyond repair. Despite everything, the girl held on to small acts of resistance. She memorized the paths between trees. She listened carefully when adults spoke in hushed tones. She noticed how the stars moved across the sky and how the river curved beyond the fields. These details became her secret world, a place inside her mind where the plantation's rules did not apply. Hope, for was not loud or grand. It was cautious, hidden, but alive. Her mother tried to prepare her in the only way she could. She taught her to work hard enough to avoid punishment, but never so well as to draw envy. She taught her which overseers could be reasoned with and which could not. She taught her when to speak and when silence might save her life, and sometimes, late at night, she told her stories, not of freedom but of ancestors who had endured worse and survived. Survival, she said, was its own form of defiance. As the girl grew older, the plantation's cruelty no longer felt distant. It pressed against her every breath. Orders became sharper. Eyes watched her more closely. The line between labor and violation blurred until it nearly disappeared. She began to understand that her body, like her labor, was considered something that could be taken. That realization changed her forever. Fear hardened into something darker, something dangerous. Yet even in that darkness, something inside her refused to die. Anger, memory, a sense of self that the system had failed to erase. Each insult, each injustice etched itself into her mind. She learned to remember everything. Names, faces, patterns. She learned that knowledge could be a weapon, even for someone with no legal rights, no voice, no protection. The plantation believed it had broken her before she ever had a chance to fight back. It believed that years of obedience, hunger, and fear had reduced her to nothing more than a shadow moving across the fields. But beneath that shadow, something was forming, quietly, patiently, the kind of strength that does not announce itself, the kind that waits. No one on the plantation noticed when her eyes changed. No one saw how her silence became deliberate rather than forced. They mistook her calm for submission. They believed she had accepted her place in the world they built for her. History would later prove how wrong they were. For now, she remained a girl trapped in a system designed to erase her, shaped by cruelty but not defined by it. Her story did not begin with rebellion or escape. It began with endurance, with watching, with learning how monsters think. And in the shadows of that Virginia plantation, long before anyone imagined the consequences, the foundation was laid for a reckoning no one would be able to bury completely. The plantation master did not arrive suddenly in her life. He had always been there, like a storm visible on the horizon long before it reaches land. His name was spoken carefully, often not at all. When it was, voices lowered and eyes shifted away, as if even sound could summon him. He owned the land, the house, the fields, and by law and custom, every human being forced to live and labor upon them. That ownership was not abstract. It was enforced daily, in rules, punishments, and the quiet certainty that resistance would be crushed without consequence. He was a man who understood power instinctively. He did not need to show to be obeyed. His authority lived in the way overseers straightened when he passed, in the way doors opened before he reached them, in the way silence followed his footsteps. To the outside world he presented himself as respectable, a successful Virginia planter, a gentleman of means, a pillar of local society. He hosted dinners, spoke of crops and profits, and discussed morality with men who benefited from the same system. None of them questioned how that prosperity was maintained. They did not need to. They already knew. From the moment the girl's childhood began to fade, his attention found her. At first it was subtle, glances that lingered too long, instructions delivered directly instead of through an overseer, her name spoken with a familiarity that felt like a violation in itself. She learned quickly that attention from powerful men was not a reward, it was a warning. On plantations, being noticed meant being claimed. He justified everything he did with the same logic the entire system rested on. Ownership erased guilt. What he took, he believed already belonged to him. The law agreed, the church rarely objected, society looked the other way. In his mind there was no crime in exploiting what he owned, there was only entitlement. The big house became the center of her fear. Its polished floors and heavy curtains hid realities no visitor ever saw. She was summoned there more frequently as she grew older, tasked with cleaning rooms that never seemed dirty, serving meals she was never allowed to eat, standing silently while conversations unfolded around her as if she were furniture. Every visit felt like stepping closer to the edge of a cliff. She learned to measure her movements, to keep her eyes low, to make herself small without appearing defiant. The plantation master watched all of this with interest. He studied people the way other men studied land, assessing value, weakness, and potential use. He noticed her quiet intelligence, her careful obedience, the way she absorbed instructions without complaint. To him, these were not signs of resilience. They were signs of malleability. He mistook survival for submission. The abuse was not always loud. In fact, much of it thrived in silence, a hand placed where it did not belong, a command delivered too softly for witnesses to hear, a threat disguised as advice. He rarely needed violence in the open. Fear did the work for him. He understood how to isolate without chains, how to control without leaving marks that might invite questions. This was not a man ruled by impulse. He was methodical. Those around him enabled everything. Overseers looked away. Other enslaved people were powerless to intervene without endangering themselves. The system thrived on this isolation, on the way it forced victims to bear their suffering alone. Even her mother, who sensed the danger, could do nothing but watch helplessly as her daughter was pulled further into the master's reach. Any attempt to resist Enley would have meant punishment, sale, or death. The girl learned that the plantation master enjoyed control as much as cruelty. He liked knowing that she anticipated his moods, that her body tensed when his footsteps approached, that fear shaped her behavior even in his absence. Power, for him, was not just about possession, it was about domination of the mind. Every time she obeyed without protest, he felt confirmed in his belief that resistance was futile, yet something about her unsettled him. She did not break in the way he expected. Others grew distant, numb, hollow. She grew quiet, yes, but also watchful. Her eyes missed nothing. She remembered everything. He mistook this for docility, never realizing that memory can be more dangerous than anger. His obsession deepened as she matured. It was no longer enough that she belonged to him. He needed to feel that she was dependent on him. He manipulated her labor assignments, keeping her close to the house. He separated her from familiar faces, ensuring she had fewer allies, fewer places to feel safe. Isolation was his most effective weapon. At night, when the plantation slept, the weight of his presence lingered like a curse. Even when he was not there, she felt him. In the walls of the big house, in the rules that governed her body, in the certainty that escape seemed impossible. Fear became a constant companion, shaping her thoughts, her posture, her breathing. But fear, when sustained too long, changes form. It hardens. It sharpens. It begins to transform into something else. The plantation master believed himself untouchable. He had lived his entire life without consequence, shielded by wealth and law. He had learned that pain inflicted on others rarely returned to its source. Each year reinforced that belief. Each unchallenged act made him bolder. He did not consider the emotional cost of what he did, because the system had taught him that enslaved people did not possess inner lives worth acknowledging. He underestimated her because everyone did. He assumed trauma erased will. He assumed silence meant emptiness. He assumed that someone raised without freedom could not imagine it, let alone plan for it. These assumptions were common among men like him, and fatal. Inside her, something shifted. She began to see him not as an all-powerful force, but as a man bound by habits, patterns, and routines. She noticed how predictably he moved through his days, when he was alone, when he drank, when he felt most confident. Knowledge, she realized, was the one thing he had not taken from her. Her obedience became a performance, her lowered gaze an act. Each moment of compliance bought her time. Each day she survived added to the quiet record she kept in her mind. She learned where doors creaked, where footsteps echoed, where the plantation's order broke down into human weakness. The plantation master sensed none of this. He mistook control for security. He believed the world he had built would protect him forever. He did not see the way his obsession had planted the seeds of his own undoing. Abuse has a way of distorting time. Days blur together, pain becomes routine, but memory remains sharp. She remembered the first moment his gaze claimed her. She remembered every boundary crossed, every warning ignored, every silent plea swallowed. These memories did not fade, they aligned. They formed a shape. What the plantation master never understood was that absolute power creates absolute blindness. He could not imagine a future where his authority failed him. He could not conceive of a world where the girl he believed broken might become dangerous. As far as he was concerned, she was still exactly where he wanted her, trapped, isolated, dependent. He did not see the calm beneath her fear, the patience beneath her silence. He did not hear the question forming in her mind, growing louder with each passing day, not if this would end, but how. By the time he realized something had changed, it would already be too late. The night she disappeared did not announce itself with thunder or chaos. It arrived quietly, like every other night on the plantation, wrapped in the familiar sounds of insects, distant owls, and tired bodies settling into uneasy sleep. To anyone watching from afar, nothing seemed different. The big house dimmed its lamps. The quarters fell silent one by one. The fields rested under the moon, pretending innocence. But inside her, everything was different. Shh. E had been preparing for this night for longer than anyone could have imagined, even longer than she herself fully understood. Preparation did not come in the form of maps or written plans. It came as memory, observation, patience. It came from years of learning when to move and when to freeze, when eyes were watching and when they turned away. It came from knowing that survival on this plantation had taught her something far more valuable than obedience, timing. All day, her body moved as it always did. She worked without complaint, kept her gaze low, followed orders with practiced ease. Nothing in her behavior betrayed what waited beneath the surface. If anything, she seemed calmer than usual, quieter, almost invisible. That was intentional. In a place built on control, invisibility was power. As evening settled in, a heavy stillness took hold of the land. The plantation master had retreated early to the big house, satisfied, unbothered, unaware. Overseers finished their rounds and disappeared into their quarters. The enslaved people were counted, dismissed, and locked into the routine of another night survived. No one noticed her breathing slow. No one noticed the way her eyes stayed open long after others closed theirs. When the time came, it did not feel dramatic. It felt inevitable. She rose silently, careful not to wake those around her. Every board that creaked, every loose stone, had been memorized long ago. Fear still lived in her chest, but it no longer ruled Fear had sharpened into focus. She wrapped herself in darkness and stepped outside, letting the night swallow her whole. The plantation looked different after midnight. Stripped of voices and authority, it felt exposed, almost fragile. The big house loomed in the distance, its windows dark, its power temporarily asleep. For the first time in her life, she saw it not as a god, but as a structure. Wood, brick, mortal. She moved along the edges of the property, avoiding open spaces, keeping to shadows cast by trees and fences. Each step carried risk. Discovery meant consequences. She had spent her life trying to survive. But staying meant something worse, the certainty of continued violation. That knowledge pushed her forward when doubt threatened to pull her back. The woods beyond the plantation were both promise and terror. She had heard stories, some whispered, some screamed, about what happened to those who ran. Dogs, chains, public punishment meant to remind everyone else of their place. But she had also heard other stories, quieter ones, stories of people who vanished and were never seen again, stories of paths that led away from plantations and towards something unknown. She did not think of freedom as a destination. She thought of it as distance, distance from the big house, distance from his voice, distance from the life that had been imposed on her without consent. Each step away was a small victory. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time lost meaning as adrenaline ride her forward. She crossed streams to break her scent. She moved through underbrush that tore at her skin and clothes. Pain followed her, but it no longer frightened her. Pain was familiar, it was survivable. By the time dawn approached, she was far enough that turning back was no longer an option. Exhaustion set in, heavy and unforgiving. Her body shook, her lungs burned, but she kept going until her legs could no longer carry her. When she finally collapsed beneath a cluster of trees, she did not cry. Tears felt like a luxury she could not afford. As the sun rose over the plantation she had left behind, confusion took its place. The first sign that something was wrong came when her absence was noticed during morning routines. At first it was dismissed. Enslaved people were often moved without explanation, but as hours passed and no orders accounted for her whereabouts, concern turned into irritation. Irritation quickly became suspicion. The plantation master was informed before noon. His reaction was not panic, but anger, a sharp, offended anger rooted not in fear for her safety, but in the violation of his authority. Property did not disappear, it was taken, stolen, or escaped, and escape was an insult he could not tolerate. Searches were organized immediately. Overseers rode out with dogs. Fields, woods, and nearby roads were scoured. The plantation buzzed with tension as enslaved people were questioned, threatened, and punished for information they did not have, or dared not share. The system reacted the only way it knew how, with force, but the trail grew cold quickly. By the end of the day, frustration settled in. By the second day, unease crept beneath the anger. This was not how escapes usually ended. There were no clear tracks, no witnesses, no body. It was as if she had been swallowed by the land itself. The plantation master began to feel something unfamiliar, uncertainty. At night, as he lay in the big house, sleep did not come easily. The silence felt heavier than before. His thoughts returned again and again to her absence, not as a loss, but as a disruption. She was not where she belonged, and the fact that she had left without permission gnawed at him. What he did not know was that her disappearance was not an ending. It was a beginning. Somewhere beyond the plantation's reach, she rested during the day and moved at night, guided by instinct and fragments of knowledge passed down through whispers. She avoided towns, she avoided roads, she trusted no one. Every shadow could hide danger, every sound could signal pursuit. Yet with each passing mile, something inside her loosened. The constant pressure she had lived under began, slowly, to ease. She no longer measured her movements against someone else's rules. She no longer waited for orders. For the first time in her life, her choices, however limited, were her own. Back on the plantation, fear took a different shape. The master's obsession with control began to craw. He replayed memories, searching for signs he had missed. He questioned overseers more harshly. He tightened rules, increased surveillance, demanded obedience with renewed cruelty. But none of it brought her back. Worse still, rumors began to spread. Quiet ones at first. Questions whispered in the quarters. If she could disappear, maybe others could too. If the system had failed once, maybe it could fail again. The idea was dangerous. The master sensed it immediately and responded with force. But fear does not disappear under punishment. It hides. It waits. As days turned into weeks, the search slowed. Officially, it was never called off. Unofficially, hope faded. She became another unresolved problem, another stain on the illusion of total control. But unresolved problems have a way of returning. What no one on the plantation could have predicted was that her escape was not driven by desperation alone. It was guided by memory, by anger carefully stored, by a resolve that had grown quietly for years beneath enforced silence. She had not run simply to survive, she had run to prepare, and as the plantation settled back into its routines, convincing itself that the danger had passed, the truth moved steadily closer, carried on bare feet through darkened woods toward a reckoning that would shock everyone who believed she had vanished forever. Morning came to the plantation like a lie. The sun rose clean and bright over the fields, casting golden light across Tobacco Row, that hid years of cruelty beneath their orderly lines. Birds sang as they always did. Dew clung to leaves. To anyone passing by, it looked like another ordinary day in Virginia. But beneath that calm surface, something had gone terribly wrong. The plantation master did not appear for breakfast. At first, no one dared to comment. He was a man of moods, and silence was often his chosen companion. Servants waited. Coffee cooled. Minutes stretched into an hour. Still he did not come. The house, usually alive with subtle movement by this time of morning, remained unnaturally still. An overseer was sent to check on him. The moment stretched as the man disappeared down the hallway toward the master's private rooms. Those left behind felt an unease they could not explain. The plantation thrived on routine, and this delay cracked that rhythm in a way that made everyone uncomfortable. Then came the shout. It was not a scream of pain, but of shock, sharp, panicked, and completely out of place within the walls of the big house. Footsteps followed. Voices collided. Someone ran outside, pale and breathless, unable to form words at first. When he finally spoke, his voice shook. The master was gone. Not missing in the way the girl had been missing, not absent. Gone in a way that could not be ignored, explained away, or quietly managed. The room bore signs of struggle, overturned furniture, broken objects, and a sense of violence that clung to the air, even without visible explanation. And then there was what had been left behind, arranged in a way that suggested intention rather than chaos. Word spread across the plantation with frightening speed. Work stopped. Overseers abandoned their posts, enslaved people were herded together, watched closely, suspicion burning in every direction. The authority that had ruled the land so confidently now stumbled, uncertain how to respond to something it had never planned for. The body, what could be found of it, was not treated with dignity. It was examined hastily, not out of respect but fear. Fear of scandal, fear of questions, fear of what this meant if word reached beyond the plantation's boundaries. The condition of the remains told a story no one wanted to hear. This was not an accident. It was not illness. It was not an outsider's crime. It was deliberate. The number itself, 66, circulated in hushed voices, never spoken aloud in the open. People did not discuss how or why. They discussed what it symbolized: precision, intent. A message carved into reality itself. Authorities were summoned before noon. Local officials arrived with forced confidence, masking their unease behind procedure. They asked questions they already feared the answers to. Who had last seen him? Who had access to the house? Who was missing? The girl's name came up almost immediately. Her disappearance, once dismissed as another failed escape, took on a terrifying new meaning. Suddenly she was no longer a runaway to be recovered. She was a suspect, a threat, something far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The idea unsettled everyone, white authorities most of all. An enslaved girl, abused and silenced her entire life, turning the violence of the system back on one of its most powerful figures. It was unthinkable, and yet there it was, lying in pieces within the heart of the plantation that had claimed to own her. Search parties were reorganized, this time with desperation rather than arrogance. Roads were blocked. Neighboring plantations were alerted. Notices were prepared but never fully distributed. The story was already too volatile. Every detail risked igniting fear where obedience was expected. Inside the quarters, reactions were tightly controlled. No one was allowed to speak freely. Faces were watched, movements tracked. Punishments were handed out swiftly for the smallest perceived defiance. The system responded the only way it knew how, by tightening its grip. But something had changed. Fear no longer flowed in one direction. The enslaved people did not celebrate. Celebration would have been dangerous. But silence felt different now, heavier, charged. Eyes met briefly and then looked away, carrying questions that had never been safe to ask before. If this could happen here, to him, then the world was not as fixed as it had always seemed. In the big house, officials debated how much of the truth could be allowed to survive. A powerful man had been destroyed on his own property. The implications were catastrophic. The plantation system depended on the illusion of absolute control. This incident shattered that illusion completely. Records were altered almost immediately, language softened, details disappeared. The brutality of the scene was reduced to vague terms, responsibility was blurred, some documents suggested unknown assailants, others hinted at internal unrest without explanation. The girl's name appeared in some versions, vanished in others. History began erasing itself in real time, yet not everything could be hidden. Rumors traveled faster than ink. Nearby towns whispered of a master who met an unspeakable end. Plantations tightened security overnight, overseers grew harsher, laws were enforced more aggressively. The system reacted like a wounded animal, violent, unpredictable, and afraid. And fear, once awakened, does not easily return to sleep. As days passed, frustration mounted. The girl was not found. No witnesses came forward. No clear trail emerged. The idea that she could have done this and vanished gnawed at those in power. It challenged every assumption they had built their lives upon. The investigation slowly shifted focus, not toward justice but containment. Officials spoke less of finding the truth and more of preserving order. This was not a crime they wanted solved publicly. It was a lesson they wanted buried. The plantation master, once so feared, became a liability even in death. His legacy threatened to destabilize the very system he had benefited from. Within weeks, the plantation resumed operations under new management. The fields demanded labor. Profits had to be protected. Life, as far as the system was concerned, had to go on. But it never truly did. Every creaking floorboard in the big house became a reminder. Every shadow in the fields felt heavier. Authority, once unquestioned, now carried an undercurrent of anxiety. The enslaved people noticed it immediately. Fear had shifted, not disappeared, but redistributed. At night, overseers drank more, guards watched longer, orders were barked louder. Control had become something that needed constant reinforcement. And somewhere beyond the plantation, the girl remained a presence even in absence. She was no longer just a memory or a missing person. She had become an idea, dangerous, uncontainable, impossible to punish. The truth of what happened that night was never fully written down. It survived instead in whispers, in altered records, in stories told cautiously long after the plantation itself faded into history. What they found that morning was not just a body. It was proof that cruelty could have consequences, that silence could carry intent, that someone the system had tried to erase had left a mark so deep it could not be undone. And no matter how carefully history tried to smooth the edges, the shock of that discovery rippled outward, through Virginia, through the plantation system, through time itself, leaving behind a question no authority could fully answer. How does a world built on abuse respond when the abused refuses to remain powerless? History did not know what to do with her. In the weeks and months that followed, the plantation's name remained on maps, its crops continued to be harvested, and its profits flowed onward as if nothing fundamental had changed. On paper, order had been restored. New management took control. Overseers enforced routines, ledgers balanced again. To the outside world, the incident became a footnote, an unfortunate disturbance resolved through silence and time. But history is not only written in ink, it is carried in memory, in fear, in the way a system reacts when its certainty is shaken. And this system had been shaken to its core. The official records told a careful story. They spoke of an incident, of unrest, of a tragic end that required no elaboration. Names were altered or omitted, dates blurred, language softened. Where specificity might have raised questions, vagueness took its place. The girl's identity, already fragile in a world that denied her personhood, was reduced further until it nearly vanished altogether. In some documents, she did not exist at all. This was not an accident, it was policy. The truth was dangerous, and danger demanded containment. Authorities understood that stories like hers could not be allowed to circulate freely. They could inspire questions. Worse, they could inspire courage. So the story was fractured, dilute, buried beneath bureaucracy and polite phrasing. Over time, it became easier to forget than to remember. Yet forgetting never fully succeeded. On nearby plantations, rules tightened, surveillance increased, overseers were instructed to watch more closely, punish more quickly, and discourage any hint of defiance. The system adjusted, not to heal but to protect itself. Fear, once a tool used almost casually, became something carefully managed. Power no longer felt effortless, it had to be asserted again and again. Among the enslaved, the impact was quieter but deeper. No one spoke her name aloud, not because it was forgotten, but because it carried weight. Stories traveled the way they always had, through whispers, through glances, through fragments shared only with those who could be trusted. Details changed with each telling, but the core remained. She had endured, she had escaped. And when the world tried to pull her back into silence, she had refused. For some, her story became a warning. For others, it became a question. If she could do what she did, if the system could fail in such a dramatic way, then what else might be possible? Hope is dangerous under oppression. It is also inevitable. Years passed, the plantation aged, buildings weathered, fields were replanted. New generations inherited land and power without fully understanding the violence that had secured it. The incident faded from public memory, replaced by other concerns, other scandals, other carefully managed silences. But the absence remained. The girl was never captured. No trial concluded her story. No official punishment restored the illusion of order. She existed in a space the system could not reach, beyond records, beyond control, beyond the reach of laws that had never protected her anyway. Speculation filled the void. Some claimed she died in the wilderness. Others believed she found refuge among people who helped the disappeared. A few insisted she lived long enough to see the world begin to change, slowly and imperfectly. The truth was never confirmed, and perhaps that uncertainty was her final act of resistance. She denied the system closure. In later years, historians would debate fragments of the story. Some would question its accuracy, others would attempt to rationalize it, to explain it away as anomaly or exaggeration. It was easier to do that than to confront what it revealed about power, abuse, and accountability, because her story did not fit comfortably into the narratives history preferred. She was not a passive victim. She was not a saint. She was not a symbol crafted to make others feel better about the past. She was a human being shaped by cruelty who refused to be consumed by it. That complexity made her difficult to categorize and easy to erase, but erasure is never complete. Every time a ledger omitted her name, it confirmed the fear she inspired. Every time a document softened the truth, it acknowledged its weight. Every attempt to bury her story revealed how deeply it threatened the foundations of the world that had tried to destroy her. In the end, her legacy did not depend on monuments or recognition. It lived in the quiet shift that followed, the way power hesitated, the way authority tightened, the way obedience could no longer be taken for granted. It lived in the knowledge, passed down cautiously, that systems built on dehumanization are not invincible. She became something rare and unsettling, a reminder that endurance can turn into resolve, that silence can conceal intention, that those forced to live without justice do not necessarily forget its meaning, and that when a system pushes someone beyond every limit, the response may not be submission, it may be transformation. History often prefers clean endings. This story offered none. There was no public reckoning, no official apology, no restoration that could balance what had been taken. There was only an unresolved truth moving quietly through time, refusing to disappear completely. Today, the plantation is gone. The fields have changed. The buildings have fallen or been repurposed. Visitors pass through places like it without sensing the weight beneath their feet. They read plaques that speak in gentle language. They learn dates and figures. They hear about progress. What they rarely hear about are people like her. And yet, her presence lingers in the gaps, between words, between records, between the versions of history that feel too smooth to be honest. It lingers in the understanding that some stories survive not because they are preserved, but because they refuse to die. She escaped more than a plantation. She escaped the narrative written for her. She denied the system the satisfaction of control, even in memory. In doing so, she left behind something far more powerful than fear. She left a question: what happens when the abused stops believing the lie of their own powerlessness? History never answered that question directly. It only circled around it, uncomfortable and incomplete. But the echo remains, carried forward by those willing to listen, to the silences, to the omissions, to the stories that were never meant to survive. Her name may be lost, her face unknown, but her impact endures, not as a legend polished by time, but as a truth history tried and failed to erase.